October 13, 1972. A small Uruguayan Air Force plane lifted off from Montevideo, Uruguay. On board were 45 people, most of them with young, rugby players, friends, brothers, teammates. They were flying to Chile for a match. It was supposed to be a short, exciting trip, a few hours in the air, a game, then back home. But the Andes Mountains had other plans. As the plane approached the mountains, the weather began to shift. Clouds thickened, visibility dropped, turbulence started shaking the aircraft. Inside the cabin, some passengers laughed nervously, others gripped their seats. The pilots believed they had cleared the highest peaks. They began their descent. They were wrong. Suddenly, the plane slammed into a mountain ridge. The right wing ripped off instantly. The impact tore through the fuselage like paper. Metal screamed. Passengers were thrown forward. Luggage exploded through the cabin. Before anyone could process what was happening, the left wing snapped off too. Now the plane was no longer flying. It was falling. The fuselage, just the main body, began sliding down the snowy slope like a metal sled. Screams filled the air. The plane finally stopped in the middle of a frozen wasteland. Silence. Then wind. The crash had killed 12 people instantly. Others were critically injured. Broken legs, crushed ribs, head trauma. They were stranded at 11,000 feet in the Andes Mountains. No proper winter gear, no real food, no rescue in sight. And the temperature. At night it dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. They searched the wreckage for supplies. They found small items, a few chocolate bars, some wine bottles, tiny snacks, enough for maybe a day or two. But rescue would surely come, right? They heard on a small transistor radio that search planes were looking for them. Hope returned. They tried to make themselves visible. They used pieces of metal to reflect sunlight. They waited. Day 1 passed, then day 2. On day 3, they heard something devastating on the radio. The official search had been called off. Authorities believed no one could survive a crash at that altitude. They were declared dead. And just like that, the world had given up on them. But they were still alive. Cold, injured, hungry, and completely alone. That night, as freezing wind screamed across the mountain, they realized something terrifying. There was no rescue coming. If they wanted to survive, they would have to save themselves.
By day 30, the mountain no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent. The survivors had created a system inside the broken fuselage. Rationing, snow melting shifts, injury care. Leadership slowly formed. One of them, Nando Parado, had lost his mother in the crash. His sister was critically injured beside him. He barely survived a skull fracture himself. But something inside him hardened. He realized something most of them didn't want to admit. No one was coming. Waiting meant death. The only option was escape. But escape meant climbing the Andes. And they had no idea how wide the mountain range was. They believed Chile was just beyond the nearest peak. They were wrong. The Andes stretch over 4,000 miles. But they didn't know that. They chose 3 of the strongest survivors: Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, Antonio Vizentine. They would climb west. Before leaving, they did something heartbreaking. They cut extra flesh from the frozen bodies, packed it carefully in cloth. This would be their food for the journey. No backpacks, no climbing gear, no proper boots. Just homemade sleeping bags stitched from airplane insulation. On day 61, they began the climb. The first step felt hopeful. The second felt terrifying. Every step sank in deep snow. Breathing became painful. The air was razor thin. They climbed for hours, then reached the top of what they believed was the final mountain ridge. They expected to see green valleys, signs of life, Chile. Instead, they saw mountains, endless mountains, white peaks stretching to the horizon. Nando later said that moment broke them more than the crash. The realization hit. They were deeper in the Andes than they imagined. Antonio decided to return to the fuselage. Food supplies would not be enough for 3. Now it was just Nando and Roberto. 2 exhausted young men, alone in the most unforgiving mountain range in the world. They walked for days. 10 days total. Through blizzards, across glaciers, down deadly slopes. Their food supply ran out. Their bodies weakened. But something inside Nando refused to quit. He later said, "I felt my mother pushing me forward." On the 10th day, they saw something different. Not snow, not rock, but green, grass. And then, a man on horseback across a river. They screamed, but the river drowned their voices. The man saw them, confused, shocked. He wrote on a piece of paper, "Where are you from?" Nando wrote back, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. There are 14 injured people still up there." The man stared at him in disbelief, then rode away. For a moment, fear returned. What if he doesn't come back? What if this was just another illusion? But the next day, helicopters filled the sky. After 72 days, rescue had finally arrived.
As the helicopters landed, Nando and Roberto led the rescuers back to the fuselage. The remaining 14 survivors were weak beyond imagination. Some could barely move. Some had frostbite, others were delirious from hunger and exhaustion. Yet they were alive. They embraced Nando and Roberto. Some wept silently, others laughed in disbelief. The media called it a miracle. The world was shocked. How could 16 people survive 72 days in the snow-covered Andes with no proper equipment, no food, and freezing temperatures? The answer was simple and terrifying. Human determination, survival instinct, and the grim choices they had to make to live. Cannibalism, which had seemed unthinkable, had saved them. Nature had been indifferent, but humans had adapted. The story spread globally. Books were written, movies were made. The survivors returned to normal lives, but the psychological scars remained. Nando Parrado later said, "Every step in the mountains was a conversation with death. You either obey it or fight." Roberto Canessa added, "The Andes taught us that life is more fragile than we ever imagined, but also more powerful. The plane crash, the snow, the hunger, the fear, all had one lesson. Survival isn't about hope alone. It's about action, courage, making impossible decisions, choosing life when everything tells you to give up." And though the Andes Mountains still hold the wreckage today, the story of the survivors continues to inspire. A frozen wasteland that took lives also revealed the ultimate truth about humanity. Even in the face of death, humans will fight to live. 72 days, 14 survivors, a story of tragedy, horror, and the relentless power of human spirit. A story that still chills the spine even decades later. Because when the world has given up on you, sometimes you are the only one who can save yourself.
The hunger was no longer just physical, it was mental. By the third week, their thoughts slowed. Conversations became shorter. Movements became heavier. Some of them stopped speaking entirely. The human body can survive without food for weeks, but the mind begins to fracture much earlier. They began hallucinating. One survivor said he could smell fresh bread. Another claimed he saw his sister walking through the snow. But when he reached out, there was nothing. Just wind. Just white silence. At night, temperatures dropped below -30 degrees. Their breath froze in the air. Ice formed on their eyebrows. Their fingers went numb. Frostbite crept slowly into toes and ears. They wrapped themselves in airplane insulation, lying side by side inside the broken fuselage, trying to trap warmth. But the cold always won. And then there was the other problem. Food. The last crumbs of chocolate were gone. The wine was finished. Even toothpaste had been squeezed for calories. Outside, their friends lay frozen in the snow, preserved by nature. No one wanted to say it, but everyone was thinking it. One night, in near darkness, someone finally whispered, "If we don't act, we die." The words hung in the air like smoke. They were Catholic. They believed in God. They believed in morality. But survival rewrites rules. One survivor spoke through tears. "If my body could save you, I would want you to use it." That sentence broke the final barrier. They prayed before they did it. They cried. They apologized. They asked forgiveness. It was not violence. It was mathematics. Calories meant strength. Strength meant time. Time meant survival. But every bite carried a weight that would follow them forever.
After weeks trapped in snow, they understood something terrifying. Rescue was not coming. The search had been called off. Officially, they were dead. The world had mourned them. Families were grieving. Newspapers had stopped printing updates. But they were still breathing. And that meant one thing. They had to leave. The Andes Mountains surrounded them like walls. Sharp ridges, endless snowfields, thin air that burned the lungs. They had no climbing gear, no maps, no proper boots, only willpower. They stitched insulation into sleeping bags. They wrapped plastic around their feet. They packed small pieces of frozen meat. Then 3 of them began to climb. Each step sank deep into snow. Each breath felt like inhaling glass. At that altitude, oxygen is scarce. The heart beats faster. The body weakens quicker. After hours of climbing, they reached what they thought was the summit. They expected to see green valleys. Instead, they saw more mountains, higher, wider, endless. For a moment, hope cracked. One of them later admitted, "That was when I almost turned back." But turning back meant certain death, so they continued. Day after day, they climbed ridges, descended slopes, slept in holes carved into snow. The wind screamed at night. Ice formed inside their sleeping bags. Their lips split open. Toenails turned black. Their faces hollowed. Yet something grew stronger inside them. Resolve. Because once you have survived starvation and avalanches, fear changes shape. On the 10th day, they saw something different. Not white, green, grass. They had crossed into Chile.
At first, they thought it was another hallucination, but it moved. It was a man, a shepherd on horseback, across a roaring river. They screamed until their throats burned, but the river swallowed the sound. So they wrote a note, wrapped it around a rock, and threw it across. It read, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. We have been walking for 10 days. There are 14 injured people above. Please help us." The shepherd read it, looked at them, and nodded. For the first time in 72 days, someone else knew they were alive. The next day, helicopters echoed through the valley. The sound was distant at first, then louder. The survivors looked at each other in disbelief. Hope had betrayed them before, but this time the helicopters did not disappear. They landed. Rescuers stepped out, staring at the skeletal young men before them. They had been declared dead, yet here they stood. When the remaining survivors heard the helicopters above the wreckage, some began crying immediately. Others simply stared at the sky, unable to process it. One by one, they were lifted into the air. As the helicopter rose, they looked down at the broken fuselage. The endless white, the frozen graveyard, the place that had nearly ended them. And strangely, some felt gratitude, because in that frozen hell, they had discovered something. The limits of the human body are far beyond what we believe, and the human spirit, when cornered, can become unstoppable. When they returned home, the world exploded with headlines. Miracle in the Andes, 72 days in the snow. How did they survive? Then came the controversy. Cannibalism. Many judged, few understood. But slowly the truth spread. They had not killed. They had honored the dead. They had chosen life together. Years later, one survivor said, "In the mountains, we learned that survival is not about hope alone. It is about action." 72 days, 16 survivors. A story of tragedy, of horror, of impossible decisions, and proof that even when the world gives up on you, the will to live can still carry you across mountains.